Jack, this is a story about people.
And turn it in.
Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning. Off the top this morning, I must say something about the latest controversy involving the responsibilities of provincial court judges in British Columbia. And I'm sure that every provincial court judge in BC is as interested as the public should be. As we all know, the Chief Administrative Judge in Vancouver, Darrell Jones, took a self-imposed leave of absence recently after it became public knowledge that he was president, had been president, was at the time president of a firm called Lawco Investments, virtually his wife's firm, when that company approached Victoria City Council to discuss demolishing an older apartment building and replacing it with luxury condominiums. Mr. Jones told me that yes, he had been the president and director of that company, but when the knowledge did become public, he had resigned as president and director and remained merely as a shareholder. Now, why should this be of public interest at all? After all, as a judge is a man who must have some life of his own. Well, I'll tell you why. There were two reasons. The Judges Act of British Columbia, modelled at the moment on the Federal Act, says quite clearly that no judge shall either directly or indirectly engage in any occupation, profession, or business other than his judicial duties, etc., etc. The second reason was that a brother judge of Mr. Jones's, Wallace G. Craig, had urged in a letter to the Chief Provincial Judge, Larry Goulet, that there should be a full investigation carried out into Judge Jones' non-judicial business interests. Now, why should that be anything of interest to us at all? When a person appears in front of any court in the land, that person must be in the position of feeling without hesitation that there is no possibility of bias, self-interest, or conflict of interest from the man who sits on the bench, who has in many ways absolute power and freedom from public criticism. So Judge Goulet, when Darrell Jones took his self-imposed leave of absence, looked into it and issued the following statement. I've checked it with Judge Goulet, and this is all he has said or will say. The Chief Judge has completed the investigation and has decided the matter does not warrant further action by him, and I checked with him myself, and he will not elaborate. Now, is that good enough? With all the respect I can muster, no, it is not good enough. Perhaps, however, it's not Judge Goulet's business to carry the explanation any further. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that there was anything, in fact, wrong with the action of Judge Darrell Jones, but I happen to know that there is a proposed amendment to the Provincial Judges Act, which may or may not come up this session, which takes out those key phrases from the present Act. Says in the present Act, remember, no judge shall either directly or indirectly engaged in any occupation, profession, or business other than his duties on the bench. The proposed amendment says, however, a judge shall devote himself exclusively to his judicial duties and shall not engage in any other occupation, profession, or business. Not quite so strong. I think this is a case where judges and the public deserve an explanation, and I've got to put it on the shoulders of the Attorney General, even though he will say he can't intervene in any way, shape, or form in the responsibilities of judges. But the Attorney General, Alan Williams, must consult with Mr. Goulet and tell the public quite clearly and simply what the guidelines are from now on for all judges in what they can or cannot do when they have the status, privilege, and power, I'm talking about business or other interests, of a judge of the provincial court. I think it's a good thing that we draw attention to these matters from time to time. Alan Williams, when he's on, I'll ask him, and he'll probably just skate around the houses, but I shall ask him anyway. Now, reporters, as you may sometimes have gathered, are not always welcome when they go out to do what we arrogantly regard as our public duty. And my reporter, Steve Wyatt, following a story of the closure at short notice of yet another old age pensioners extended care home, gives me this report this morning.
Jack, this is a story about people and what happens to them when they become the commodity in a profit-oriented business. The Crestwood Guest Home is an extended care facility here in Maple Ridge. On March the 16th, the 47 residents here were given a letter, and it told them that they all had to be out by April the 12th. The letter offered regrets from the operator. Her name was Esther Hoeshoe, and there was no actual reason given, but what she said was due to circumstances beyond her control, the place was shutting down. That gave the 47 residents aged between 70 and 100 4 weeks to find a new place to live. And we tried to talk to Mrs. Hoeshoe and her administrator here at the hospital. They refused to tell us anything. We talked to the Ministry of Health, and they assure us that the 47 people here will find a new place to live, and they're confident that everyone will have a new place to live by the end of the month. Specific places were not given. We also have been told that this home was losing money, although it is funded in part by the provincial government. But because it's losing money, and has been for some time now, the owners have no choice but to shut it down. As we said, we tried to talk to the owner to find out what might happen to the building. She's refused to talk to us.
We weren't able to talk to the owner. I have a report that the building may be refurbished and reopened again, perhaps for some refined kind of operation a couple of months from now. But let me tell you, as you look at the Crestwood Guest Home in Maple Ridge, that there is an obligation on the owners, when their contract with Human Resources, to give 12 months' notice of cessation. Because, of course, they get handsome, good grants on behalf of all the old people who are in there under the extended care program. But Human Resources, the extended care people, have not recently been too happy with some aspects of the operation of Crestwood in any case. They felt that the programs for the older people were kind of being downgraded. And of course, as a money-losing operation, I understand that the staff at Crestwood, as of Monday, will be one person on one shift to look after the old people as they're being phased out and being replaced in other facilities, hopefully in the same neighborhood, because some of these old folks have been there for 10 or 15 years. And as Steve told you, they're between the ages, roughly speaking, of 70 and 100 years of age. They'll be looked after all right. But one hates to see accommodation for old people, which is in short supply throughout the province, becoming suddenly, with a very not a sharp letter, saying, You're 100 years of age, you're 70 years of age, you're an extended care patient, in effect, be out by April the 12th. On the program this morning, too, I've got a man whose book I have actually read. And it's about Bernardo boys. His name is Ken Bagnell, an author from the East. Don't hold that against him. It's a good book about the Little Immigrants. And we may find a couple of Bernardo boys among the audience this morning who can match Ken's horror stories of how Canada treated some of its earliest young immigrants. But for news value this morning, Robert Kaplan, Solicitor General of British Columbia, who's having some kind of barneys with, what's his name? Alan Williams, I just mentioned him, the Attorney General. And of course, is the guy who wants to see our mail opened in the public interest one way or another. After the break. Favor of opening by what?
Pardon? By warrant. Well, that's what we're talking about.
I happen to be a reactionary.
Yeah, no, but here in BC, there's a strong feeling that they shouldn't be open on any grounds.
That's bullshit.
Yeah.
You got to. Bob Kaplan, Solicitor General in the Liberal government, and I will not mention one single word about the bleeding Constitution this morning.
Okay.
But let's dispose of this little parochial row we're having. How dare you, Mr. Kaplan, from the East, impose a decision to move the RCMP headquarters, which have been established in Victoria, British Columbia for 1,000 years, to Vancouver without our Attorney General's approval, because after all, he is in charge, not you, nor the Minister of Justice, in the administration of justice in BC.
Yes, he's involved in the administration of justice, but it's well established that the headquarters location is a matter of internal management for the force and for me as Solicitor General. And there was consultation with his ministry in the past as this move was being worked out. I can understand why it's not popular in Victoria, but I can promise this, that it will produce more efficient policing on the West Coast here. And I think that's the most important thing.
When you say you've had consultation with the Attorney General's department, that means you had consultation, but they didn't agree from the word go.
No, I think that they were very supportive from what I have seen of the records. And you know, to talk about an Easterner making the decision, the Commissioner of the Force, Commissioner Simmons, spent most of his career on the West Coast.
Oh, Bob Simmons, is he in support of this decision?
Yes, he's in support of it, sure.
Mind you, he was the headquarters guy in Vancouver for many years, but what difference will it really make, moving a couple of hundred Mounties, most of them brass, I should imagine, from Victoria to Vancouver?
Well, they do a lot of movement back and forth just to do the management job out here. And the center of gravity of crime in this province is Vancouver, and this is the place where they can be most effective in doing the job.
When will the move take place, Mr. Kaplan?
Well, this is it, you see. It's not taking place tomorrow. It's going to be phased in over 2 years. There'll be normal transfers, normal attrition. We'll be offering other jobs in the federal government to the public servants who are supportive and who will want to stay in Victoria. So I don't think Victoria will have much of a
I'll tell you what the problem is right now. I'm almost sure. House prices in Vancouver are what, 50% higher than house prices in Victoria?
Yeah, but you know, the force is used to that because they expect in their careers to move around the country. And prices discrepancies between the West and the East are much greater than that. And so it's something that the force accepts as part of the job.
So you tell me when Williams people were consulted and the decision has been made?
Well, the decision has been made. The move hasn't begun yet. It's going to start in a small way in the next few months. But it has been made, and it's been made in the interests of good policing of this part of Canada.
All right, now let's get straight to, so Mr. Williams can tell me. He can't even refuse to move. You're the boss in this one.
Well, you know, if we hadn't been consulting, I think the criticism would be more valid, but we have been consulting over the last while with them about the matter.
And they seem to be in agreement.
Well, we had every reason to believe they were.
Oh, well, you know what civil servants are. I presume that it's bad in Ottawa as they are in Victoria.
No comment.
Now, what about this mail opening? I see that you're being skewered by a number of people in the East. Well, on mail opening.
Yeah, I've always been in favor of the force being allowed to open mail in valid circumstances and with proper safeguards. It's illegal, and they're not doing it, but a Royal Commission, the Marin Commission, has now recommended that mail should be allowed to be opened in the same way that wiretapping is authorized with proper safeguards and judicial approval. And so something's happened that I was hoping would happen. And now it'll have to go to Cabinet and go to Parliament, and there'll be a full debate about it. But I think we can convince the Canadian people that we'll have more effective law enforcement, as we do with wiretapping, with this new authority.
You approve the recommendations of René Marin, isn't it?
Yes, I do. He's recommending that a policeman would have to swear before a judge that he had reasonable and probable grounds to believe that a crime had been committed or was in the course of being committed, and on that basis he could be authorized to go to the post office in a structured circumstance and
show
have a
his
particular,
warrant,
yeah,
open the envelope, reseal it.
Reseal it and let it go through. There might be drugs in it, for example. It might be allowed to carry on. You know, you can put $80,000 worth of heroin in an ordinary envelope and not even feel it.
Well, I'm inclined to agree with you to a point, but I feel that the opening of mail, the last vestige of privacy, you might say, in this country, can only be justified when the national interests in some way are being severely affected.
Well, that is an issue that's with the Macdonald Commission right now, and they haven't, their report is in the process now of being made public, where they will be dealing with that issue, and Marin didn't touch it. What he said was the Macdonald Commission's looking at the national security. Let's see what they have to say.
Okay, next one. How do you react to Marin's recommendations of the television spying on postal employees because of the $4 million worth of theft and vandalism, I believe, in one particular year? How do you feel about that?
Well, it's outside my field, and they're not recommending that the Mounties play any role in that type of surveillance. They're recommending that police be established within the post office staff itself to do that job. But I think people want it. I think the public is fed up with that type of abuse, and we've got the statistics which show that it's substantial.
But they have it in Toronto right now, and it doesn't seem to do that much good.
Well, I think it must be somewhat effective.
So therefore you're in favour of mail opening in certain circumstances, and you're also in favour of television peeping on postal employees where they're handling
for the purpose of preventing theft, yeah.
Why not just on a warrant basis, the same as mail opening? Or do you want to scan every employee who does anything with mail in the post office?
Well, I doubt if you could get the policeman to come and swear that he thought a crime was going to be committed. You know, the warrants have to be pretty specific. You have to know exactly what you're working on.
Mind you, if I were a postie or an inside worker, I'd feel very unhappy that my integrity is being challenged and questioned, and that somewhere up there is a little camera watching me in case I happen to be going to slip open an envelope in a toilet and steal money. Something I...
Well, it works the other way too, though. Most of them, of course, the vast majority are honest people, and yet the thefts are occurring and the statistics are there. So you'd say, well, if a person's an honest person and they recognize the problem, they might as well be willing to have this happen. Better for their reputations.
You Liberals are sure moving to the right a little bit, aren't you?
Well, we've got a Royal Commission before us dealing with serious problems.
Okay, I'll give you a proposition.
Yeah.
Through the Macdonald Commission, time after time we had Solicitors General who appeared to be totally absent of any knowledge of anything being done at any time or couldn't remember. Yeah. If you're the Solicitor General at the time the mail opening comes in, will you be informed as to what is being done and how many warrants are being used and why? And will you be able to tell the public without having to search a faulty memory?
Well, I think the age of police accountability is here, and people expect the politicians to know what the police are doing and to be accountable for them.
No.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
I have
the Solicitor General must know what's going on.
I think the public is entitled to that.
More with Bob Kaplan, Solicitor General of the Liberal Government in Ottawa, after the break. I read a little piece in one Eastern paper, which may or may not be true, that Solicitor General, who I hope I've got the right Cabinet Minister, was busy at the moment taking all the national security items out of the Macdonald Commission report to present to us a whitewashed version of this lengthy inquiry into barn burning, phony propaganda messages, and all the other admitted acts, some illegal, done by the Mounties. Are you now cleaning up the Macdonald Commission report for public consumption?
Well, we've got the second report now. I have it. It's 2,400 pages long, and a lot of the matters that it deals with would damage the national security. I'm not talking about the reputations of individuals.
Talking about spy things.
But the national security, if they were revealed. The different procedures that the security service follows in our country for getting information that are lawful, or some that the Macdonald Commission may recommend should be lawful. These are dealt with
some
in the
that
report.
have been unlawful.
Well, but then there's another report coming out from the Macdonald Commission in the next little while, sometime this spring, which will deal with individuals. And that report, I think, will be handled very quickly, and we'll turn it over to the Attorney General of Canada, and it will have recommendations which will have to be dealt with. But this particular report, the one that I'm in the process of editing now, contains matters and procedures and police operations and security service operations that I don't think should be made public, because if they are, they won't be able to do them anymore. Their effectiveness might be reduced. The attitude that we take to foreign agents in the country and how we go about getting information from them, countering or deterring their activities. I mean, there's a limit to how successful they'd be.
Okay, but in the second report, we'll say that Superintendent or Staff Sergeant XYZ had engaged in, for instance, blowing up a Cuban embassy or planting a firebomb somewhere, burning a barn. Will we get that information if it was an illegal act which the Macdonald Commission found reprehensible?
That information I'll turn over to the Attorney General of Canada, and decisions will be made about turning it over to the provincial attorneys general, and in principle it should be turned over. You know, the policy of the force, which is in effect right now, is that if any suspicion of wrongdoing appears against a member of the force, it is turned over right away to the provincial attorney general. We do that. It's happened out here on the West Coast a lot.
Question, Keeble, the commissioner, Keeble is it? Keeble?
Cable.
Cable,
In
the
Quebec.
commissioner in Quebec who carried out
You
his...
see, he's recommended prosecutions against members of the Montreal Police Force and members of the RCMP and members of the Quebec Police Force. And the Attorney General of the province, responsible for the administration of justice, he has the decision to make about it.
In other words, Ottawa has nothing to do with that decision.
Well, in connection with normal offenses against the criminal code, it goes right to the Attorney General of the province, and he has to decide how to handle it.
So the Quebec Attorney General, or just hypothetically speaking, the BC Attorney General says, okay, examine the evidence and lay the charge.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a normal law enforcement matter, and the point of it is that police are accountable for their acts in law just the same as anybody else.
Okay. I've been a reporter for 35 years in BC, 34 years in BC. And during all these years, I have watched the treatment of juveniles fritter away, go down the drain, story after story, you know, just disaster. How many years since you amended the Juvenile Delinquents Act?
73.
Do you, in fact, raise your right hand and tell me you have a new act?
Yeah. In fact, I've tabled it in the House about 2 weeks ago. I had a lot of consultation with all the provinces about it because they're the ones who administer it. It's like a criminal code for young offenders, and it's long, long overdue. No doubt
Is
about
it too soft?
Well, it's tougher than the existing law. For
Well, at the
example,
moment, of course, nothing can be done to any juvenile about anything under a certain age, and we have no place where we can put really unruly ones to be held in some kind of close custody, have we?
Yeah, well, I'm not so enthusiastic about containing offenders. I mean, even adults, I think putting them in prison or in jail, which for adults is nearly $30,000 a year, should be the last alternative.
Just for the violent ones?
Well, for violent or for denunciation. I mean, someone may have committed a crime and be a distinguished member of society, and putting him in jail for
These
a
are the
while is
ones
the right
I
thing
like
to
to
do.
see going to jail.
Well, all right, that's the right thing to do for them. But basically, for young offenders, usually containment is the last resort. And this new bill emphasizes all the other alternatives. Making them pay fines, making them repair the damage that they've done.
Making their parents pay fines?
Yes, that's in it too. Making them pay compensation to their victims, which is a very important new idea that we're developing, and where BC is very supportive, as a matter of fact.
All right, now I'll go along with you. I'm reasonably left-wing on a good day, reasonably right-wing on a bad day.
Yeah.
But I see here, and I don't know how you'll react to this at all. Well, let's go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Legal aid is a wonderful thing for adults, but it is milked to death and has contributed greatly to many delays, many of them unnecessary, in the adult system of justice. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, the worst setback to fighting crime in the last few years has been legal aid, because accused now have defenses. But I agree with that.
But nobody ever
I think
pleads
the
guilty
accused-
anymore.
Well, they do in cases. They do in a lot of cases. But rich or poor was the big deciding factor before. And I think in a just society, you have to give poor people the same chance to defend themselves. And even though it does set back law enforcement, it's hard to argue with rights of people to be able to defend themselves.
I can't argue with you on that, but here I see you have set up a duplicate system now for a 12-year-old boy who's behaved in a nasty, naughty manner.
Yeah.
He will now have right to legal representation at all stages. He must be told about counsel. They'll go to appeal right through to the Supreme Court of Canada, I presume.
One thing that was left out of the old law was a recognition that young people were also people and that they were entitled to have their rights. I mean, under the present law, the one that we want to change, they can be sentenced to an indeterminate time. They can be denied a lawyer. They can be denied the right of appeal.
I thought that had been ruled unconstitutional, the indeterminate stuff.
No, they're, in fact, you know, after, let's say they've been sentenced to a year, then they go back on the street without committing another offense under the present law. They can be called back to court and imprisoned again. Now,
only if they appear in adult court.
No, if they're still under 21 in youth court. But still under 18, rather, in youth court. Now, that's the present law.
Nobody goes to jail as a juvenile in BC.
Well, provinces have containment facilities. I think in BC there's only one, but there's group homes, there's wilderness camps.
They're not containment facilities, they're a lark.
Yeah, well, those are the sorts of alternatives that provinces have for incarceration.
You're not a little bit worried, and you know, we're all civil libertarians, but on a practical common sense basis, you're going to set up a parallel legal aid system to go right through to the sky.
No, in fact, it's going to be the same legal aid system. We're going to talk to the provinces about helping them with the cost of bringing it to young offenders. But you can't get away from rights. I mean, rights are very important in a free
What
democratic
is the adult
society.
age now? 17?
In BC, I think it's under 18.
Under 18?
Yeah.
If I hadn't been for all your other problems in the House of Commons and whatnot, this would have been passed years ago, wouldn't it?
I think so, yeah, because
Shame.
it's long overdue.
When are we going to get down to the important business of the country?
Well, we're working on the Constitution now, and we're proposing that debate ends soon. And we'll be back to other business, energy, and the economy, and justice issues with it.
Well, I know you're going out to speak to another flock of potential lawyers at UBC this morning.
That's
right.
right.
Time for one good section of phones at you on mail opening, juvenile delinquents, the Macdonald Commission. What was the other? Maybe Alan Williams will phone in and take offence at what we said.
Yeah, possible.
After the break. He's with me all the way.
Is he?
Yeah.
Well, why don't they do something about it? There must be a lot of good people of integrity who want to be provincial judges.
You apply for jobs here. The bums go on about it. I went on the air after the time of the Farris thing, which was a total and utter scandal. The greatest whitewash in Canadian legal history in 30 years. Really? Aided and assisted by the lack of action by the Judicial Council, who said, oh, hang on to those results.
So 9, and
However,
that'll leave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 7s with Bagnell.
Bagnell.
Bagnell. Okay?
No cards.
No cards. God damn it.
You said this was one of your left days. This is one of your right days, my friend.
I know.
I can tell. Have a good day. I'm glad I'm leaving right now.
No, but I'm in favor of mail opening.
You know, the best informed people in the country are federal inmates. Amazing what they know and read.
I was out, thank you very much for setting up that stuff I did. It was good, it came out for it. I'll say one thing for you, you've certainly opened up the federal prisons to people like myself, or the inmates who want to talk to people like myself. Has that helped to defuse any of the...
As a matter of fact, it has, because one of the main causes of incidents and hostage-taking in the 70s was for access to the media. You know, people would do it, and what they wanted was to see Jack Webster.
Or whoever.
Or whoever. So just by agreeing in advance that the media are allowed into prisons, in principle, I mean, there's exceptions with some troublemaking journalists who we have a track record on.
You're okay with a safe old codger like me.
That's what I was getting at.
Yes. Go ahead to Bob Kaplan.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Yes, I'd just like to say to the Solicitor General that I agree when it comes to mail opening that it is a good way to crack down on the crime that we're, experiencing in this country right now. And I know for a fact that a number of people, say in the drug trade, use the mail system as a way of transporting the drugs from point A to point B. And I would like to see, under certain circumstances and under government control, the ability of the Solicitor General and the RCMP to be able to open the mail and to see what is there. And I'm sure under other circumstances, again, under certain circumstances, that that they'd be able to open the mail.
Yeah, but you, for instance, Mr. Kaplan can't tell us of any case specifically where, for instance, a suspected terrorist organization has been nabbed by this kind of thing. Can you?
Well, it's not lawful now to open the mail, so it's clear that they're not allowed to. There were abuses in the past in the 70s where mail was opened, but not very good records were kept of what the results were.
Right, I forgot to ask you a question. Yeah. Would the warrant still apply if you are, for instance, intercepting potential espionage conversations, letters?
Well, that's not what Marin was talking about. He was just talking about fighting crime, not national security.
But what about fighting espionage? Would you apply the warrants to that too?
Well, I think that there should be a procedure for opening mail in those cases, but that's a Macdonald Commission issue. I went to see the Macdonald Commission and I told them my views about it, and I said I hope that they would give some recommendations on it. Now, what their recommendations are going to be...
So you're waiting for the recommendations on the espionage...
and subversion.
And subversion.
Right.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
It's regarding your comment about the transfer of RCMP members to...
Vancouver from Victoria.
That's right.
Right.
Does the federal government provide any grants for, let's say, these members being transferred from Victoria to Vancouver regarding the housing situation? Let's say members in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. Now, these are the highest points.
Okay, we've got the question.
The answer is that we allow them a leave to go ahead of time and look for a house, but so far we have no specific programs for helping them afford a house in a new area, or in fact helping them to dispose of a house that they may be stuck with in a town somewhere where there's a poor real estate market.
Average price in Vancouver?
I think we should be doing something about it, frankly, because in some other agencies of the federal government they do, and this is something I noticed as soon as I became Solicitor General, and I'm working on some proposals to try and assist them. I know, for example, CMHC employees do get some assistance when it's not very much, but it's more than the members of the force get.
I mean, we don't want you to start subsidizing a Mountie to buy a $250,000 house in Vancouver because the one he's got in Victoria will only sell for $100,000.
Well, whatever we do, it should be a national program, because this isn't a special problem here. It's a serious problem, but it's something that the force has lived with for 100 years.
But it's the worst problem in BC.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think we ought to be able to...
That's partly because of your immigration policies. The wealthy immigration is just grabbed and pushed up house prices in parts of BC.
It's also because we've managed the economy so well that,
it's also because
Vancouver's become a very prosperous city.
It's also because so many of you flee from the east, 1,000 a month, to live in British Columbia with your indexed pensions.
It was snowing when I left Toronto yesterday.
Go ahead, please. Where are you?
Mr. Kaplan.
Yes, sir.
I'm a touch disappointed in you.
Why?
I was an area manager for you when you first entered politics, and you defeated Dalton Kemp.
Right. What's the problem?
The problem is opening the mail. I don't understand that. I was also an area manager and a campaign manager for Mr. Jim Fleming.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you feel about getting a warrant to go into somebody's home? Going to court, swearing an affidavit that there are drugs there or something? That's something that's been part of our legal tradition.
There's a difference between a warrant and there's the difference between opening somebody's mail.
Why do you resent more opening mail with proper safeguards? With proper safeguards. Yeah, why do you think that's worse than getting a warrant to actually go right into your house and look under your bed?
Where is our legal situation in that regard?
Well, to me, I think that law enforcement justifies certain invasions of privacy under safeguards.
Mr. Kaplan.
Of course it does.
Yeah, and the example of it is going actually into a person's house and seeing things that they wouldn't even put in the mail.
Matter of fact, they don't need a warrant to go into your house if they have reasonable and proper belief that a crime is being committed at that particular moment.
Yeah, that's right. And so the reason I answered you that way is to try and show that it's already established that there's a certain law enforcement justification for these invasions of privacy. The way I look at it is an invasion of privacy.
You must know as well as I do, when you open somebody's mail,
Yeah.
it's an invasion of their privacy and it's illegal.
It is illegal. That's why it's certainly not being done now. What I was saying was that we should change the law to allow it to be done
Well, okay, so
with
how do you
safeguards.
get-
I can tell you right now that there is a...
How do you indiscriminately or discriminately open somebody's mail?
He just told you.
Yeah, you'd go to court and you'd say a letter has been received in the post office from so-and-so to so-and-so. Here's the evidence we've got against them. We suspect that there might be drugs in it or something in it, and we're asking the court to allow us to open it.
Thank you, sir.
It's exactly the same
Thank
type
you,
of
sir.
justification that you give for going into someone's home
But
to
what that
prevent
call
crime.
does demonstrate quite nicely is that, I agree with you, a warrant for a house or a warrant for a letter, but somehow or other, letters are more private even than houses.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't see it that way. Frankly, I think going into someone's house is much more serious than opening mail. But I mean, they'll both be covered by safeguards.
I presume we're still battling down doors with axes.
Well, but since he asked that question, let me just emphasize, I'm not talking now about something that is presently being done. I mean, it's illegal.
You stopped it.
It is
Finished.
illegal to open mail for any reason now.
Go ahead, please, from Victoria.
Yes, I'm surprised, Mr. Kaplan, regarding the juvenile question, that you aren't more aware of what's happening in BC. Our adult age is 17 here.
Right. There's 3 different ages across the country.
I realize
it's 16, 17, and 18. And,
I realize that,
yeah.
but we also have containment centers here. We have 4 of them.
Yeah.
So I was just surprised at your apparent lack of detailed knowledge about our province.
Yeah.
Well, fair enough.
Well,
What's your question?
I've heard a lot of complaints in BC about the lack of adequate numbers of containment facilities, and they're provided by the province completely at provincial expense, and I apologize for not knowing exactly what the situation in this province is.
We've got one dreadful place at Willingdon where I've done some horror stories about how juveniles are treated in that place. But we don't seem to have an effective system at all, and anything you do that's an improvement has got to be welcomed.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. From Grand Prairie, Alberta. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Mr. Kaplan, I have
Yeah.
a question for you. It's about myself more than about what we're talking here this morning. I have a criminal record.
Mm-hmm.
About 10 years old. I got out of jail in 1971.
What's your question?
My question is, how long do I have to wait to get to be able to go apply for a job and say, no, I don't have a criminal record?
Well, we have a system of pardons now, and I've expressed criticisms of them because they're not very adequate forgiveness. I think a person who's had a clean record for 10 years should be pardoned in a way that would entitle him to say that he doesn't have a criminal record. And you're quite right. Under present law, you've got to say you do, but it's being forgiven or it's being discharged. To change that would take legislation, and I'm working on it, and I hope that there will be legislation brought forward during this Parliament.
I didn't know that. I thought
Yeah.
if I got a pardon, I could cross the border and say no criminal record.
No, that's you.
I've got to say had a criminal record, pardoned.
But I've been pardoned. That's right.
You'd like to say after an automatic period of, well, you'd review it,
that you
presumably.
don't- that you
Are you
don't.
clean? Have
Yeah.
you got half a dozen references? Wipe out.
In fact, I tell you, what I'd like is if you're asked, have you ever been convicted of a criminal offense or ever found guilty of a criminal offense, I'd like to change the law so that you'd be able to say no.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Go
But
ahead,
that's not
please.
the way it is now.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm very worried that our system's going to end up being like what one of the Supreme Court judges in the States is trying to do. When he visited Russia, he said that the Gulag system there was very good, and that if he'd like to enact a law where if a person was going to commit a crime, that they would imprison them for their own good. I was wondering if we were going to follow that route.
No, we're going to try and have a smaller proportion of people in prison and more people being punished outside.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. I just listening to the comments of your speaker here this morning on concerning the post office workers, with them being worried about TV surveillance.
Right.
I don't think if they were not worried about doing anything wrong, they shouldn't care who watches them. IWA, there's lots of mills in the Lower Mainland here that have security guards with TV surveillance all around the yard just to pick up theft there. So if it's going to stop, if I can get my mail, or you get a check coming in the mail and you want to make sure it gets to your house, if that TV is going to help us.
Well, they're worried that it's going to be...
There shouldn't be anything wrong with them. They shouldn't worry.
What they're worried about is that it's going to be used as a management technique to force them to work harder or faster or to change the way they're working. I don't think they would object to it as much if they thought it was only being used for security. But as I say, they're worried about larger applications of it, that it's the thin edge of the wedge or something.
Thank you. Thank you. Question on the juvenile delinquents. Is it a provision to fingerprint juveniles in this new act?
If the offense is one for which adults could be fingerprinted, the answer is yes. But if you're acquitted, the fingerprints are destroyed. And if you've had a clean record for 2 years after conviction, the records are not sealed but destroyed. That's the proposal.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Kaplan and Mr.
Morning.
Webster.
Morning.
I have worked up north at a private company, and they have had all the things you talk about, except for one thing. They couldn't get a warrant to open mail that was known to contain drugs of one sort or another.
Well, that's because there's no legal authority to grant such a warrant right now.
I agree with you, sir, that there should be. This was the only way you had to contain it. Our plant had the magic eye, and I worked for security down here.
You're in favor of it. Thank you very much. I know you've got to go, Mr. Kaplan, Solicitor General, so we'll watch for the Juvenile Delinquents Young Offenders Act.
That's right, changing the name.
Watch for we'll watch for legislation on mail opening in due course. It'll come from Chrétien, will it, or from you?
I think from the Postmaster General.
We'll watch for the Macdonald Commission report, suitably edited by you in Part 1, not so suitably edited in Part 2.
And down the road for something on pardons.
My thanks to Bob Kaplan. Next, Ken Bagnell, used to be with the Toad and Flail, the Globe and Mail, written a very good book about the Bernardo boys. And if I can find one this morning, phone me after the break.
Or descendants of them, Jack.
Yeah.
You might get descendants, because a lot of people will call in and say, oh, my dad was one of them.
In a 60-year period between 1870 and 1930, 80,000 kids came from the British Isles to Canada. And I remember when I was a youngster, I must have been 5 or 6 at the time, hearing of youngsters in our neighborhood who were going to Canada as Bernardo boys and feeling kind of vaguely jealous. You know, they're going to Canada. Goodness gracious me. What I didn't know was that in the years before, and perhaps in the years then, many of them had been used, little waifs from wherever, as slaves. They were brutalized, they were murdered, they were exploited. And I was fascinated to get the book by Kenneth Bagnell on the Little Immigrants, the orphans who came to Canada. Are you related to Bernardo's boys?
No, I'm not related to them, but I knew a bit about them when I was growing up as a boy in Nova Scotia, and I was always intrigued about them.
I mentioned the name to half a dozen people around here this morning, and not one of them knew who Bernardo was.
Fascinating, because some of the people who have reviewed the book, including some academics, who have been very generous in their praise of the book, said they didn't know anything about it. And there are reasons for that, that we didn't know anything about it.
Somebody said in a paper that this is one of the finest pieces of social history ever to be written.
Well, the critics have been overwhelming in their praise of the book, and that's received by a writer very generously, of course. But the main reason that I'm pleased with the book is that it helps tell the story of a group of people whose story has been so little known in Canadian history.
How did it all start?
Well, it all started with the dreadful poverty of industrial England in the 1860s, when for thousands and thousands of people, life was just a torment of hell from which death was a blessed relief.
Barely 100 years ago.
That's right, and historians are still trying to unravel, Jack, the reasons for that indescribable poverty. Children were living on the streets, they were sleeping in the gutters, they were sleeping under the bridges. Into that situation from Glasgow. You ever heard of Glasgow?
Vaguely.
Came Annie McPherson, social worker of her time, an evangelical of her time. She came to London to practice social work, but she was so distressed by the situation that she saw there that she said, I'm going to do something about these children. So she began to take the children into hostels that she constructed, but she had so many of them, she couldn't handle them all. At the same time, in Canada, as early, in fact, as 1826, An official of the Nova Scotia government was over in England saying, send us the children who can work on the farms. Even a child can earn his keep. So Andy McPherson got word of this, and in 1870, the first load came to Belleville, Ontario. And for 60 years afterward, Annie McPherson and Maria Rye, and then the great figure of child immigration, Thomas John Bernardo, began to send children over.
Let's see the little man. He's on the monitor now. There he is.
A fascinating man, a man of incredible energies, a man of incredible commitments, a man of certain vanities, a great showman, and we can talk about his showmanship, but his organization alone sent 30,000 children, 30,000 children to this country.
Now, must say the picture from the book, the story in the book makes me feel that all of them were brutalized, exploited, humiliated, treated like animals, and in some cases murdered.
Not entirely so. Let me
not
entirely so.
50% of them.
But there were a lot of them who were abused. A great many of them who were overworked. That was the great thing, overworked. But the majority of them were emotionally deprived. They were not treated as children. We know now that children need love and security and warmth to have a normal childhood. Too many of these children were denied their childhood. There were some who had wonderful experiences, who came from the gutters of industrial England, and by a roll of the dice, Jack, just a roll of the dice, they landed in a good home, and they were raised as part of the family. But too many of them were like Ellen Higgins, who is part of my book, who came to Nova Scotia in the early years of this century when she was 8 years old. Within a month, at 8 years old, she was picking the boulders from the field. She was carrying the water for the cattle. She was and she'd never been on a farm. These children had never seen a farm, most of them. They didn't know what a farm animal was.
How did Ellen finish up?
Ellen finished up very stoically. She finally, after being on that farm 8 years, she pumped up her courage, and she wrote the home in Halifax that put her there, and she said, come and take me. She had never been visited once by the institution that had placed her in that situation. When the man came from the home in Halifax, he found her working in the cold fields of November without even a pair of gloves. Took her away. She lives today in Ontario. She's a woman in her 80s, and she said to me when I met her, she said, after going through that, I don't think there's anything that I could not withstand.
Well, the prairie's not the worst.
Well, Winnipeg, it was very tough in Winnipeg, because here's why. These were boys who had never, as I told you earlier, seen a farm. They'd never been used to a harsh climate. Suddenly they are sent to Winnipeg, and then from Winnipeg, many of them were sent up to Russell on the border of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, to a farm that Bernardo, this incredible man, Bernardo, in the 1880s, opened a 14-square-mile farm where he sent boys to learn the rudiments of farming, and then they were dispersed to the farm.
But they'd be decently treated there.
On the farm, yes, but life for them there was extremely harsh because the organization had very little money. It had very many boys. The conditions were very Spartan and very lonely for them. These were boys from, remember, the teeming streets of London.
Listen, were they just dragged away from the parents, or did they have no parents in Britain?
Some of them had no parents. Some of them had parents who fell on such bad times that they felt, as you did, that to send the child to Canada was to send to the land of opportunity. I'm thinking, for instance, of Fred Treacher, who came when he was 9. You know?
Tell me about Fred Treacher after the break.
All right.
Ready?
Twice. 4 6s.
Going quickly this morning.
You want to go phones on this at all, or?
Yes, I will do. You see the delicate. Look at that wee picture. That's not Fred Treacher, but tell me a little bit about Bernardo's PR.
Well, Bernardo was a fascinating showman. One of the great things that he did was take a photograph of every child who was taken into care. Tens of thousands of children taken into care. Every child had a photograph taken when he was brought into the institution and before he was sent to Canada. And this was because Bernardo was fascinated with the camera and photographs, but he was also using these photographs to raise funds. He was a tremendous fundraiser.
But for instance, show me that little girl again, if the camera's still there. Didn't he kind of make them look worse than they even were for PR reasons?
There was a big investigation into his home. He was cleared, but it was, he did admit that sometimes he took the child in to make the child look a little more distressed. The hair was mussed.
But always in a good cause.
Always in a good cause.
What about Fred Treacher?
Fred Treacher is a man living today in Toronto, friend of mine, came to this country when he was 8, And you speak of thinking as a boy that it was a land of great promise. Fred thought that he was going to see cowboys and Indians. That's what Canada was to him. And so he was met at the railway station, little card on his coat lapel, sent out into the country in a place called Elmvale, Ontario. And he was met there by a farmer who took him to the farm, and he didn't even invite him to the table, never invited him to the table. He ate alone in the kitchen while the family ate in the dining room. And he said to himself, what have I done to deserve this? What did I do to deserve this? He tried, the farmer wanted him to milk the cow. The second day he was there, go milk the cow. And Fred Treacher had never seen a cow. He tried to milk, he couldn't learn to milk. So one day when he was really doing his very best and he couldn't do it, the farmer said, come here. And he took down a black snake whip and he laid the whip onto him, and Fred ran and ran, and the farmer chased him and began to beat him while he was on the ground. He had a terrible childhood with those people, but he ran to another farm nearby, and he spent a lot of time with the farmer next door on another farm, and they were wonderful people. They were good people. And so this farm family was almost a second father and mother to Fred. And so one day Fred got a letter from London, and they said, your younger brother Bert's been sent to the home, and we're going to send him to Canada too. Do you suppose you might be able to get him a home near where you live? So Fred thought about it, and he went across the field to the other farmer and his wife, and he said, look, my younger brother Bert is going to come out. Do you suppose that maybe you might be interested in him? And the other farmer and his wife said, why not? We'd love to have a boy. So out came Bert, and he went to this family near Fred's. And Fred's own life, which was so full of pain, was somehow brightened. Just seeing his brother being treated like a human being, being treated like a son. He was expected to work, but he wasn't expected to be a slave, and he was given affection. So, as I say, Fred's life brightened up, and he used to go across the field of the farm to play and help in the chores with the younger brother. One day he went across looking for Bert to help him with the chores, and he couldn't find them. He went in the house, farmer wasn't there, wife wasn't there, and neither was Bert. Then he thought to himself, I know where Bert is. Bert's feeding the ducks because he's at the mill pond. He loves to go to the mill pond to feed the ducks. So he climbed at the back of the house to a hill, and he looked down to the mill pond, and he couldn't see anybody, but he saw the farmer, and he saw his wife, and he saw a man stirring the pond with a huge pike pole. And the farmer's wife looked up and she said, Fred, don't come down here, stay there. But he started down the hill, and as he started down, the pike pole was raised from the water, and at the end of it was the little cap that the boys wore. And they found Bert's body about an hour later. But even as an old man, Fred Treacher would still go back to the cemetery, because in the cemetery was the stone that revealed a boyhood he dreamed he might have had, that Bert had for such a brief time. On the stone, Jack, are the words, here lies Bert, a homeboy, dearly loved, and dearly missed. That's what the Little Immigrants is all about. It's pain and it's poignancy.
When groups came out, brothers and sisters, were they always kept together, or were they just brutally split up?
No, in fact, once in the 1920s, a family of 5 came down the gangplank in Halifax. 5 children from Birmingham, the Weir children. The oldest was a boy of 11. The youngest was a girl of only 2 years of age, brought down in the arms of somebody. That very night in Halifax, perhaps it was because the pain of parting would be too great, perhaps it was just the confusion of it all, they were sent their separate ways immediately. No one was told where he was going.
What year was that?
This was in the early 1920s.
In the 20s?
Yeah, when it was almost winding down. Now, the oldest of those boys was Horace. All his life, Horace tried to find his brothers and sisters because he felt that he had somehow, Jack, he felt somehow responsible for them, that he was the oldest. Eventually, he did find them all except the little girl. He couldn't find Beatrice because Beatrice was 2, she was adopted, he thought, and he heard that she'd been sent to the United States, to a family in the States, and so he concluded he'd never see her again.
Happy ending or not?
50 years later, one evening he was driving home.
I found one Bernardo boy already, but we'll talk to him in a minute or two. Annie McPherson, the social worker from Glasgow, raised money to send out about 50 kids.
Well, she came out with first load was 80, but thousands of them came later.
Oh, Annie did too, as well as Bernardo.
Thousands. And then Thomas John Bernardo began to send his first children. The first lot of that 30,000 came out with Annie McPherson. Then later on, he established homes in Toronto for the boys, Peterborough, then Winnipeg for the boys, and then his farm up in northern Manitoba.
Wasn't any kind of rip-off on his behalf?
Not a bit, no. As far as I'm concerned, and of the investigation I've done for 4 years into this and various records, there was no profiteering.
Why was he investigated in Britain?
He was investigated in Britain because his enemies, partly out of jealousy for his success and partly out of religious bigotry, decided to try and discredit him. And he wasn't discredited, although he didn't perform as admirably as he might have in the arbitration hearing. There was a huge arbitration case, and the complaints against him for mistreatment of children, for decorating the photographs, as you said, and for a couple of other minor things. Those complaints didn't go to court. They went to an arbitration hearing, and the arbitrators said that his homes were operated honestly and that there was no abuse of children in the homes.
Now, the abuse was in the hands of the people who used them as slave labor here. How many have you traced that were actually murdered?
Oh, well, there were cases of at least 3 or 4 who died in the hands of their employers, but we don't know because so many of them vanished and were never heard from again. But there are, in the Little Immigrants, I tell the story, of course, of George Green. It was one of the most tragic cases, in a case of outright murder in which a woman was charged. But there were others as well, and some of them have come to light since the book has been out. Since the book came out, people are writing and sending me stories and clippings.
Why is she convicted?
There was a hung jury.
A hung
jury. And the case just disappeared. I mean, during the case, the boy was castigated for being humpbacked, an imbecile, a big eater. He was even criticized for being a big eater.
Just unbelievable. Okay, what else do I want to know out the book?
Well, Bernardo was, you were asking me earlier, was a tremendous showman. Did you know that every year, the anniversary of his home, he was always proud, incidentally, Jack, that he didn't take a cent from government. You know government, and you know how people, if they take too much from government, they begin to be part of the government. Well, Bernardo was a real private sector person, and to this day, his homes, which do a wonderful work in child care in Britain today, don't take a cent from government. But every year on the anniversary, he'd hold a big concert. The children would perform drills. They would be shown working in the tinsmith shop where they took their trades. They'd be shown working in the tailor shop. But Jack, at the very end, when the concert was over, in the packed Royal Albert Hall with the royal family present, at the very end, Bernardo would step forward, there would be silence. He would ask for prayers for his dear boys and girls, the flower of my flock. And then quietly from one side of the stage, a long line of boys with duffel bags on their shoulders would begin to march on. Little girls carrying suitcases
all
in their hands.
set to go to Canada.
Bound for service was the word. And then at the very end, Jack, the very end, a small girl would come up, bringing up the rear of that long line of hundreds of little children, and she would raise a flag, and on that flag was one word, goodbye. Now, Jack, those boys and girls, don't ever forget it. They became the parents of generation after generation of Canadian people.
One other thing. Did he know about the brutality being meted out to some of his youngsters in the West End and Ontario?
Yes,
he knew about it.
He knew that
Did he try to stop it?
They tried their best, but look, Jack, they were operating on a string of a budget. They had about 3 workers in Toronto. They had about 2 workers in Winnipeg, and they had hundreds and thousands of children out.
Listen, a friend of mine is in your book. A man who might have been Premier of British Columbia, came very close.
Absolutely.
Was
Bob
Bob Strachan. Strachan says Strachan.
All right.
Do you remember the story about Strachan?
I do indeed. I talked with him. I talked with him on the phone, and he is remembered with great respect in the Maritimes, where he was at a home down in Nova Scotia. And
he was one of the last to come out in
1931. That's right. It was almost winding down to its end when he came out. And he came out in an organization that sent children to an institution in the Annapolis Valley of Nova Scotia.
Duquesne Farm.
That's right. And he showed great promise there, and is remembered by the man who looked after that farm as a boy who took a trade, I believe a carpenter trade.
Correct.
And then he got into union activities and organizing, and
politics.
He had quite a career.
Oh yeah, he was leader of the NDP, and he just retired after a distinguished career when he was the representative of British Columbia in London.
He's one of the great success stories of child immigration, and there were others. There were some exceptional ones, and we'll come to them.
The Bernardo boy we have on the phone now after the break. Yeah, Ken Bagnell's book, Little Immigrants. Well, of particular interest to, I suppose, people who came to this country, but quite a social document. And here we have, good morning, sir.
Good morning. Yes, everything that gentleman has said on your Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Your volume may be up a smidgen. You best take a moment to turn it down, because that gives you an instant block if you hear both feeds. That's point number one. Point number two, when did you come to this country as a Bernardo boy?
In 1930.
Yes, well, you were one of the boys who must have come after you were 14 years of age, I gather, then, eh?
Yes.
What age were you when you
met by Mr. or Dr. Black
Right.
at that big house in Jarvis Street in Toronto.
538 Jarvis Street, yeah.
That's correct, the
Now
old Massey residence.
That's right. Tell me, sir, how long did you stay on Jarvis Street before you went to the farm?
One day.
Uh-huh.
Next day we went out in a big limousine.
Yeah.
And the group individuals dropped off on farms around Smithville area in Ontario.
Okay, and how long did you stay on the first farm you were placed on?
The first farm, I was there about a year and a half.
Uh-huh.
And the afternoon I got there, the farmer was shingling his roof on the barn, and I had to carry up the hogs of shingles before I even got into the house to change clothes.
Yeah, uh-huh.
How much were you paid?
I was paid $1 a month, and out of that I had to buy my overalls.
Yeah. So you didn't have exactly a wonderful experience on that farm, I guess.
No, I used to work from dawn to dusk. I ate most times out in the back porch of the farm.
Yeah.
I fought with the farmers. I've been hit with what they call sleigh belts, harness belts.
Yes.
And I used to run away from one farm to the other, and then finally, as Dr. Black said to get rid of me, he signed the papers for me to go into the Army, and that was my salvation.
Right. Well, for many men like you, sir, the Army was the salvation because they got away from the terrible conditions they were placed on the farm, and they got some dignity in the services. Tell me this, did you ever have an inspector come from Bernardo's during that first year who would ask you how you were being treated?
No.
Not once.
What about your family? You came from England, did you?
That's correct, sir.
What about your family? Did they know you were leaving and where you were going?
Nope. No, the home cut off all ties with the rest of my family.
But you said goodbye to your family in England before you came?
No.
How was that? Tell me about that, because we're now talking about 1930.
I know. I was put into the county council home in Chelsea, and then from there I went to the meeting point in Dr. Bernardo's homes. I've forgotten,
And you were whipped away without your family knowing about it?
Well, I asked this Mr. Black to give me their addresses, and he said they were spread all over England.
Well, I tell you, sir, if you want to write me in care of Jack here, and if you're ever looking for your records, I can help you get in touch with the people who have those records, if you're interested.
Yes, I am.
Well, you write to me in care of Jack Webster, and Jack will forward it to me, and I will tell you where you can write, and your records are in London, and we can turn them up. And I will have the right address for you. Well, just give me one other answer, and that is, did your family fall on bad times? Is that what happened, or?
Well, on my birth certificate that I did finally get was, as far as the father went, was blank.
It was blank, eh?
Just my mother's name.
Uh-huh. Well, thank you very much for calling me today. And one thing I hope is that the book, The Little Immigrants, will contribute something to a renewed sense of appreciation on the part of Canadians for what some people like yourself went through in order to become, I know, good Canadian citizens.
Yes, because the Army was the one that did it. They gave me all of the courses. One thing, incidentally,
yeah.
When I was on the farms, we were not allowed to go to schools.
Mm-hmm.
In 1931?
Right. That was part of the provision that we would get schooling,
yes.
but we never did.
Yes. Well, that, as you said, sir, you were supposed to go to school. That was the arrangement, Jack, that was made with the farmer, that the child would get schooling. But too often, the farmer simply said he needed them, or the school experience was so painful for the child who had a different accent.
You can believe that.
Frightened.
You can believe it in the 1890s or 1910, but 1931, that was vicious, wasn't it?
Indeed.
Thank you very much for your call.
Thank you, sir, and I'll read your book.
Thank you very much.
Much obliged. Go ahead, please, to Ken Bagnell.
Yes, good morning, Jack and Ken there.
Good
I
morning.
just thought I'd like to inform you there, my great-grandfather was head of one of the Dr. Bernardo's home in Toronto.
Oh, yes.
Perhaps Ken has heard of him.
I have. I'm sure I have. What's the name? Not Mr. Hobday, was it?
Beg pardon?
Not Mr. Hobday?
No, Davis was his name, Malcolm Francis Davis, and that was in the early 30s.
Oh, yes. Well, that would have been the home on Jarvis Street, 538 Jarvis Street.
He was there for years there, and a kinder, finer old gent you could never
Let me
meet.
ask Ken something. Was it a good thing and a bad thing?
Well, it was like a lot of other things in human history. It was good and bad, but today we wouldn't tolerate the very idea of taking a child from the teeming, crowded streets of London and sending him a world away to work as a laborer. It was flawed.
Very kind and understanding with children. He was strictly Victorian. I was just a boy when I met him. I was only 9 years old, but I felt like I'd known him for 100 years the first time I met him.
Yes, I'm sure that the people who worked for Bernardo's in England and worked for them in Canada were humanitarian people. And one of the things that I'm proudest about in the book is that the book is being recognized as a well-balanced, fair account. It does not make out the Bernardo organization to be villainous.
Well, they used to call him Dr. Bernardo, I believe.
Well,
That's
was
right.
he a doctor?
He was a doctor. He wasn't always a doctor when he was using the title.
Was that his real name?
Thomas John Bernardo was his real name, yes. And he was a medical doctor.
Good, thank you, sir. Hold on, we'll go back to the phones with Ken Bagnell and the Little Immigrants, the orphans who came to Canada after the break. You're next. Success story.
One of the boys. Great success.
Okay, wants me to talk about a great success story now. Who's running this place, you or me, Bagnell? Give me a great success, apart from Strachan, who of course
yes, he was.
a great success story.
Well, one of the most remarkable stories came near the end of it all when a little boy who, like you, growing up in Glasgow, like you, he was growing up in London, and he had a very painful boyhood in London. And he dreamt of becoming a Bernardo boy. He dreamt of coming out to Canada on his own. You know what he did? He went down the street. He saw a sign in a window, a big poster. On top of a load of hay was a boy astride a load of hay looking for all the world as if he had the world, and underneath were the words, "Come to Canada. Be your own boss at 21. You could volunteer to come out." He was 14 years old. He went in, he volunteered. He thought he was coming out to heaven. He ended up in a dirt farm in a shack, a tar paper shack outside Lindsay, Ontario. Now, this boy was not abused. He was not physically abused, but he ended up with an elderly lady and her son, and they were illiterate people. And they could not understand this boy who sat at the table in the evenings writing poetry. Writing poetry. He asked one evening if he might have a bath because he was sure that he was only on the way to the big white house.
Right.
That somehow he was with the caretaker and the big white house was to come. And so he said, "Do you mind if I have a bath?" And the elderly lady said, "You want a bath? What do you want a bath for, boy? My husband lived to be 90, never had a bath in his whole life. And he was a better man than you'll ever be." Anyway, he had a very painful experience there, but he used to go to church on Sundays, to the Presbyterian church. And the Presbyterian minister sensed in him something that was unique. And he used to invite him to his home on Sunday afternoons to talk about poetry and ethics and moral questions. And that was his salvation, because that minister had him move to another farm where the farmer was a graduate of the agricultural college, his wife was a doctor, but the boy was not cut out to be a farmer. He was a frail little fellow from London. So in 1930, Jack, he drifted to Toronto. He was a city boy. And the only job he could get in Toronto was selling donuts on the streets in return for a bed to sleep in and all the donuts he could eat. That was it. That was it. But he joined the YMCA, the Broadview YMCA in Toronto, a working class YMCA, and they had a working class boys club. So he joined. One evening at that club, they had a speaker just back from a tour of Russia, a YMCA man, gave a talk, and then he said, "Any questions?" Suddenly this little fellow at the back in rags began asking some very penetrating questions about the economic situation, the cultural history of Russia. And so the YMCA man was almost out the door, leaving, and he thought to himself, "I better go back, I'm going to talk to that boy. I'm going to ask him." So he went back and he said, "What's your name?" And the boy said, "Jack." He said, "How much education you got, Jack?" He said, "I've got none. I'm one of the orphans from England. They come over here to work on a farm. I've got no education, maybe grade 6. He said, "You seem to me like a bright boy. If you ever want to think of going to school, you call me up at the Y, and I'll see that you get an IQ test, and we'll help you go to school if you want to go to school." 3 weeks later, the YMCA man got a phone call. Jack took an IQ test. He was given an hour to complete the test. He completed it in half an hour. He answered every question. Murray Ross and Richard Davis, the YMCA men who gave him the test, couldn't believe it. So they took the test results to the University of Toronto. The University of Toronto said to them, "This boy is 1 in a million," literally. The long and short of it was that they gave him the textbooks. He finished his high schooling at home in a few months. He became, in the judgment of many people, the most brilliant sociologist in Canadian history. He was a founder of York University, one of the founders of York, first head of sociology at York, and he's dean of a university in Southern California today. John R. Seeley, one of the Little Immigrants.
Great stuff. From Sook, BC, to Ken Bagnell and his Little Immigrants.
Hello.
Thank you, Jack.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Bagnell?
Yes, hello there. How are you?
I came out in 1923.
Uh-huh. Which organization did you come out with, sir?
I came out with Miss Burt, who's related to the...
That's right.
Yeah.
She was Annie McPherson's sister.
Right. Well, I came out with her, and I was in Kensington Chelsea School in Epsom, Surrey.
Right.
Saw pictures of Canada. My sister and I came out together.
Yeah, and did
I
you...
saw the kid on a horse munching an apple. Great, I'll go. But I thought there'd be cowboys out here like this other chap.
All right.
And my sister and I came out, and we went to Belleville, Ontario, to Marchmont.
Yes, to the Marchmont home, yes.
And Marys were in charge at the time, and Mr. Black was the government man, like the other chap said, that came to see us about once a year.
Yeah. Where were you placed, sir, from Belleville?
Up around Madoc, El Dorado.
Oh, yes. And what kind of a time did you have there?
Well, the first farm, it was I really wasn't treated too badly.
Yeah.
Farmer's life was a hard one, from dawn to dusk sort of thing, and I was treated fairly good, except that it showed once in a while that don't ever forget you're the bottom of the barrel, you are just a hired man, and don't you forget it, you know.
That's right.
There was no actual abuse, except I got appendicitis there, and because of the farmers really not knowing, I nearly died of peritonitis. It just saved me in time. I was in Belleville Hospital for 6 weeks.
So what happened after that first farm? Where did you go then?
Then I went to came out and the farmer came in and introduced me to the farmer and said, "Would you like to work for this man?" I said, "Yes." I went out there and I just got in the house and this big farmer's wife said, "I don't want any of those English kids around here. Why did you bring him here?" That's the first thing she said, and she never spoke again till I ran away 2 weeks later and she says, "Where are you going?" I was out in the field sucking wheat and I decided to go. I came in the house, ran up, grabbed my bag and ran out into a thunderstorm. And I hid out in a blacksmith shop along the road to Belleville. They picked me up later on. The local cop came and picked me up and took me back. And the farmer was very nice to me. He was sad.
One last question. Did you keep in touch with your sister?
Yes, I did. Can I quick story on my sister now? My sister went on the farm where they treated her very nice for a while. Then they made an absolute slavey out of her.
Okay, I'm afraid, old Bernardo boy, I've got to leave you there. Thank you for your call. And my thanks. Were you ever a preacher?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
I knew it. You're a good storyteller. My thanks to Ken Bagnell and his Little Immigrants.
Great to see you again, Jack.
Many years ago. After the break.
Well, that's why he wanted...
Now, Monday morning, Gladys.
Sir John Ford, the retiring British High Commissioner.
And
Grace McCarthy.
Sir John Ford is a gas. You'll love him. He's the guy about whom Waddell skated and told, remember? Sir John Ford. Should be good fun. Monday, 9 a.m. precisely. Solicitor General Kaplan tells how he plans to open your mail.